The future is built by us, says Klaus Schwab, chairman of the World Economic Forum, a very powerful non-governmental organization that is determined to lead us into a transition process to a whole new world. A great reset, you might say. And in fact, he does say, you will own nothing, you will eat the bugs, and you'll be happy. Speaking of eating bugs, COP27, the UN Climate Summit, is still going on, but soon to wrap up. And I've got some bad news. We're on a climate highway to hell, and you must repent for your sins, which means paying up and learning to live with less, because we need to think of the children. And a G20 summit is also going on, where powerful but useless bureaucrats get together to scheme up ways to take away your liberty and ruin your life. The latest, all G20 nations, except for one, surprise to come, has agreed in principle to a, quote, global health passport. You thought the pandemic was over because Biden said so before the election? It's not going to matter. We'll get you up to speed on all of this and more on episode 372 of the In the Tank podcast. All right. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I am your host, Jim Lakely. I'm the vice president of the Heartland Institute. Our usual host, Donald Kendall, is absent today. He's actually meeting with another usual podcast participant, Justin Haskins, down in Dallas with the one and only Glenn Beck. Hoping to hear a report back from them next week. So let's go around the horn. We have a little bit of some fresh faces on the podcast this week. First, our usual regulars, Chris Talgo, senior editor here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, Chris?
Doing good. And Jim, when you mentioned the Highway to Hell quote from COP27, it immediately made me think about the AC/DC song. And I really hope they weren't playing that when they had that, that guy come out on stage. That would be a slap in the face to AC/DC.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have it in my head too, but except I see Beavis and Butthead doing this to AC/DC. So if you bring up Beavis and Butthead when it comes to our global leaders, I think that's right on the money. Also joining us today is Linnea Lueken. She's a research fellow for climate and energy here at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, Linnea?
I'm doing just fine, Jim. Thank you.
Glad to have you here, and especially when we're going to be talking a lot of COP27 today. I know you've been watching that very closely. And also joining us today is our Director of Publications at the Heartland Institute, Sam Karnick. Sam, welcome to the podcast again. It's been a while.
Thanks, Jim. It has, and I'm very eager to, say very interesting things that will offend as many people as possible.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes. I mean, that's a promise now. You got to keep up with it. And actually, I'm actually wondering what kind of warning label we're going to get on this video here, the video version of the podcast on YouTube. Is it going to be a COVID warning label? Is it going to be a climate change warning label? Is it going to be a Great Reset warning label? So we'll see. I don't know if they could put all three in at once. Maybe they can have a GIF running, and they just have all the warnings going on. But this is the part of the podcast where Donald Kendall usually says, if you are listening to this on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Google Play, or just the audio version of this podcast, you can tune in live on the Heartland Institute's YouTube channel. The Heartland Institute is all you need to search for on youtube.com. We do the show live every Thursday at noon Central Time. And if you are watching this right now, or watching, you're watching it either live now or you're watching a recording of it later, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and share it with your friends. That helps us fight the algorithm that is constantly suppressing us when we talk about, what we're going to be talking about on the show today. So another request from Donald, and he's the regular host of this podcast, so I'm going to honor his request. He wanted our opening banter to be about Donald Trump deciding to run for president. Probably the least surprising news of the week. But we talked a little bit about Donald Trump last week. And Chris, are you excited, terrified, or meh about Donald Trump running for president?
So I saw Ron DeSantis' comments about this, because he has been getting all sorts of questions from the mainstream media about 2024. And I'm going to basically just echo what he said. We all need to chill out. Okay, the 2022 midterm election is still not even over. We still don't know a bunch of races in California. We still don't know the outcome of the Senate because of the runoff that's going to happen in December in Georgia. So can we all just take a giant breath? And also, let's focus on governing before we already look to the next election. So I'm just gonna avoid this altogether. I don't think we should even be talking about 2024, not for months.
Yeah. Well, I have somebody in my family who you could not, I don't think you could really be a bigger Trump fan than this family member of mine is. She's devoted, not devoted her life to him, but, she's about as a big a Trump fan as you can get. She doesn't walk around wearing MAGA stuff all over the place, but, she was a big Trump fan. She loved his presidency. I am a big Trump fan. Donnie is a big Trump fan, or was, or has been, now I guess the jury is out. But this person in my family, Sam Karnick, she said, pretty much I'm done. She watched his speech this week saying that he's running for president, an announcement. I think it went on for 2 hours. I mean, I saw one criticism, even from a Trump fan. It's like, you can deliver a speech without going on for 2.5 hours. What do you think you are, Castro? But, I think for a lot of people, I guess speaking for myself, I think Trump served a very important purpose when he ran in 2015 and when he won the presidency in 2016. And I'm starting to get much more into the thinking, Sam, that he served his purpose. Well done. You don't need to run. You don't need to be president again.
I've long thought that the Republicans should tell Donald Trump that he was just an absolutely fantastic president and he did a great job, and that what he did for the economy and reducing regulation and lowering taxes were all fantastic things. What he did for the Supreme Court was great. And thank you very much. And let's see what happens. For me, as you can probably tell from what I was just saying, I'm really interested in the policy side of things. I'm not that concerned about personality. And I believe that Trump was a terrific president who unfortunately could not do anywhere near as much as he apparently would have liked to do. That said, what he accomplished was terrific. The one thing he did that is possibly irreplaceable, though, is that he really encapsulated the difference between the sort of World Economic Forum elite mindset and the sort of populist mindset of the American people. I think that, as Daniel McCarthy has written, populists won the elections this year. And that's an important thing because we're always on the verge of an elite takeover of our government and incredible amounts of incursions on our civil liberties. We're always on the verge of that. And what Trump did that was so interesting was de-emphasize in his talk the fealty to free markets. And yet in his policies, he was 100% a free market guy. And I think that's important because to me, what that indicates is it's an assumption on the right that free markets are a good thing and we have to have them. That's the assumption. But that does not mean that every corporation is good, that every institution is healthy, or anything of the sort. So what I think Trump brought to the table was something that may be irreplaceable, which is that sense that it is the elites, the big government against the people. If someone like Ron DeSantis or another individual of either party or a new party can make that argument and make that case, then I think we will have much better policy going forward and we'll have a much better nation and world. That said, we're on the brink of a disaster right now, and it may be that nobody can save can save us from the consequences of the last couple of elections.
Yeah. Yeah, Linnea, anything to add about that? I mean, Trump definitely was a disruptive force. I mean, he was the first true outsider president, certainly in your lifetime, and maybe even mine. I mean, the closest we could probably get would be Ronald Reagan, but he was hardly an outsider. He was, two-term governor of California and been in politics for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In terms of popularity, sure. So I've gone back and forth on this a lot. And I am deeply skeptical of some of the push that's been going on in the media. And even DeSantis himself, like you mentioned earlier, has asked people to pump the brakes on the feud narrative that has been generated over the last 9 months or so. Donald Trump, I think, is legitimately the only person who has it in him and has the financial freedom to stand up to these people. I do not think that there is a single other candidate, regardless of Trump's imperfections on certain policy issues or his temperament. If people don't like that, I personally, most of the things that people don't like about Trump in regards to temperament, I actually like a lot because it's real. It's not this like fakey, weird stage stuff. But I have seen a lot of stuff with like the Lincoln Project's fingers all over it, pushing the idea of DeSantis for president over Trump and saying that Trump's time has passed, blah, blah, blah. If he's getting too old, if there's legitimately an issue there, then if we see that, then that might be a reason to reconsider. But at this point, I am all in for Trump again. If it ends up, I don't think that there's making peace in politics. It feels like they're trying to drag us back into that pre-2016 Republican Party where everyone is like, well, all immigration is good for the United States at all levels. And, there's no problem whatsoever from the illegal immigration, except that maybe it's going to cause an issue, with our social services or whatever it happens to be. All those stodgy old things that I'm not confident that DeSantis has it in him to revitalize that same kind of groundswell approach that Trump has. I'm just not convinced that anyone else can do it. And if that means Trump gets in and then immediately is firing everyone in the administrative state, then that is absolutely epic. And that's what I want to see happen. And almost every policy issue that people can take with Trump also applies to DeSantis. DeSantis, let's not forget, was in favor of red flag laws.
Mm-hmm. Well, no candidate is perfect.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. I would be extremely pleased if Trump got in again, assuming that he maintains his wherewithal. I think that it's extremely obvious that he is still the only real threat, considering the left has been kind of pushing DeSantis as well. I think that the fact that they're still investigating him and desperately trying to make it illegal for him to run again means a lot more than people will be willing to admit. Yeah. So I'm gonna take the other side of the spectrum path of our group here, and I'm gonna say, let's go Trump. He announced that he's running. DeSantis has not announced that he is running. I am all in for Trump.
All right. Well, we got one meh, two no's, and one hell yeah. And I think the only thing scarier to the media and to the ruling class of the United States than the first Trump presidency is a second Trump presidency where he doesn't have to run for re-election again. So we'll see. He would definitely be arrested at that point, though. But we can maybe talk about that at another point in time, because we have a lot to cover in this podcast today. So let's start with COP27. So this is it's the Conference of the Parties. It's the United Nations annual huge climate summit. We have the global elite flying in on private jets from all over the world. This time they are in a resort town. It's always someplace really nice. A resort town in Egypt. I think I saw a report of 400 private jets coming in. So you're going to have to eat bugs. You're going to have to wear sweaters and maybe even a winter coat in your home. Great Britain, I just saw an alert today. Great Britain has the highest energy prices they have ever had, highest in history. So, and that's just starting, and the winter's barely even got going. So, the global elites, they get to do what they want, live the way they want, but you're going to have to adjust the way you live your lives. And so the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, he got to, of course, address all the elites that showed up at COP27. And yeah, as we mentioned in the opening of the podcast, when you hear this video, you should probably have AC/DC in your head all day. Andy, why don't you go ahead and hit that pretty crazy clip one.
Is ticking. We are in the fight of our lives, and we are losing. Greenhouse gas emissions keep growing. Global temperatures keep rising. And our planet is fast approaching tipping points that will make climate chaos irreversible. We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator. The two largest economies, the United States and China, have a particular responsibility to join efforts to make this pact a reality. And this is our only hope of meeting our climate goals. Humanity has a choice: cooperate or perish. It is either a climate solidarity pact or a collective suicide pact.
All right, Linnea, you heard it. We're either we're either getting together on the climate, or we're committing collective suicide as a world, as a species, apparently. You are on our, this show airs live every Thursday at noon Central Time. Climate Change Roundtable, which Linnea is always on, airs every Friday at noon Central Time. And I don't know if you'll be talking about quite that. I'm sure you'll be talking a little bit about COP 2027, but you present, and others, and Anthony Watts and Sterling Burnett and Andy Singer present evidence that shows we are actually not in the climate fight for our lives, that our civilization is not in peril because of warming temperatures. So what did you laugh when you heard that we're on a climate highway to hell? I mean, I guess whoever wrote that in his speech should probably get a raise.
No, unfortunately, I don't find any of this funny. It's considering the policies that were pushed at this conference, and the fact that a lot of people, especially young people, believe them, that we're hurtling towards apocalypse. It is not funny. People are legitimately frightened. People legitimately do not know the science, the background of the data that actually shows that, for the most part, there's either been no change or a decline in extreme weather events over the last 100 years or so. The ideas that he's promoting are based off of scenarios and models that they fully understand are over-exaggerating. There's one in particular that they tend to use, RCP 8.5, which also is used in a lot of other research papers from basically every area of science. So you'll get, a biology paper about some species. How will climate change affect this species? And they'll use a few different models. They'll use a lower end one, and they'll use something like RCP 8.5 as their high end. And this is implying that RCP 8.5 is possible. But that model is based on an idea of burning more coal every year than the planet has inside of it. It's literally not possible for that kind of emission scenario. But they call it the slightly above business as usual pathway. It is not. It is impossible fantasy land. But that is what they use to scare the pants off people on this issue. They say, we're going to increase our temperature by like 9 degrees by 2100. That's not going to happen. And to get there is, like I said, literally impossible. So there is no apocalypse. Luckily, more and more climate scientists from major universities have started to speak out and kind of tell their colleagues in open letters in major publications saying, like, hey, we really ought to stop emphasizing the worst case scenario models because it's basically impossible. And it's causing a huge disconnect between the way that the media covers climate change and what the data actually shows.
Yeah, I mean, you see, I saw another story this week, I think, again, from Britain, that the school children in the United Kingdom are technically and report being depressed about their future because of this BS, this propaganda, this alarmist propaganda they're being fed by no smaller authority than the United Nations, which, in its own airs thinks it rules the world.
Well, Jim, it's also happening here because in the election last week, we saw that young Americans voted overwhelmingly in favor of climate change.
Yeah. I mean,
that was one of their top issues.
Right. I mean, Sam, 30 years of indoctrination. If you keep at it for 3 decades, you probably get some return on that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a fascinating matter when you think about it, because there is so little substance to it, but it is all about scaring people into action. So it's like they look at the human beings as a herd of horses. Horses. The reason horses run is because they are scared. So what you do is you throw a bunch of firecrackers into a bunch of horses, and they'll stampede. The same with cattle. That's how they treat us. But the interesting thing on top of that is that they very much dislike coal, and it just so happens that the United States has so much coal. So that indicates a transfer of wealth from the United States in particular to the rest of the world. That's what all these things are about. They're about wealth transfer. If you look at what they're proposing to do, it's that we will monetize carbon, by which they mean carbon dioxide, which is universal. So they're not really monetizing that. What they're monetizing is forests and oceans and or lakes or whatever, but they're monetizing things that take carbon dioxide in and don't let it out. So what that does is takes money from, as they say, the industrialized north of the northern hemisphere, and brings the money down to the less industrialized southern hemisphere. Again, accident? No, that's what it's all about. This is all about wealth transfer. It has nothing to do with keeping the temperature. Where do you get the 1.5 degrees Celsius number? Where do you get that? It's just really such a weird coincidence that it's such a round number, 1.5. And where you get that is because you look at it and you say, if we have this number, it's something that people can remember very well, and we say that's what we're going to shoot for. And so you say, in order to do that, we have to shut down the entire economy of the northern hemisphere and send all our spare money, which is any money that isn't already in the hands of billionaires, down to the southern hemisphere. This is something that is not going to play very well with the public when the consequences start to roll around, and they will. But that's how elites work. They never, ever, ever understand the second order, third order, and so on, nth order consequences of their actions. Yeah. Because they always expect to adjust as needed by using their power.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to come to you with this, but I first want to read, it's in the show notes. This is a story in The Independent, which is a British publication. The title is "Stop This Crime Against Life. Children at COP27 Call for End to Illegal Mining and Deforestation." And so I'm going to scroll down through here and read a little bit of this, and I'm sure Andy will show it up here on the screen, including the pictures of these kids, which is interesting. Stop illegal mining, educate all children about climate change, and increase finance for countries on the front lines of the crisis. These are among the demands of children from across the world who have come to COP27 determined to see results in tackling a worsening crisis that they have felt compelled to address at such an early age. Governments should act now, said Francisco Vera, a 13-year-old climate activist from Colombia. Don't be remembered as the ones who allowed this crime against life to unfold. A delegation of 7 children from different countries arrived at COP27 this week to join the Children and Youth Pavilion, the first ever dedicated space for children and young people at a UN climate conference. Francisco said he'd come to reclaim the voices of children in the climate debate, a discussion that will inevitably impact future generations the most. Scrolling down a little bit here, Francisco says, not only because there are one or two children around, but because we have the chance to advocate for children's rights, he said through a translator. The climate crisis is a child's rights crisis, he said, speaking of the children around the world who have been forced to leave their homes in part due to the climate crisis. Just as an aside, the climate crisis is a child's rights crisis. What 13-year-old speaks like that, even through an interpreter? That person has been coached to be, by adults, to be the face of a radical agenda. He says that he's faced threats in Colombia for his activism, but he's forging ahead. What a brave little young man. Asked what he wanted to see achieved during the negotiations in Egypt. He listed his demands: more ambition and accountability from the countries most responsible for the climate crisis, i.e. the global north. That'd be you and me and most people listening to this podcast, people in the Northern Hemisphere. Joining Francisco was 13-year-old Sofia Mejia Cadavid from Dominican Republic. She says, quote, "Kids want a space where we have the opportunity to be a part of campaigns and actions for climate change. We're usually ignored." Yeah, really? Okay. And she says it's also our home, so we have the right to fight for it. And she wraps up here: "Our planet is just beautiful, and it's just so easy to love it. I want all the kids in the world to also fall in love with it so they can have this passion to fight for it, since we're really destroying our Earth." Chris, the reason I read all that in that story from The Independent, and again, it's in the show notes so people can read it for themselves, is that the headline caught my eye, because the headline in the story says that children at COP27 call for end to illegal mining and deforestation. These same children would demand, and I'm sure they're demanding, and they can't wait, when they're old enough to get their driver's license, to drive only electric cars. They would ban the internal combustion engine tomorrow if they could. They can't understand why we dumb adults won't agree to this very simple solution. But of course, how are electric cars powered? By batteries. How much earth needs to be pulled out of the ground to make just one Tesla battery? The answer is 500,000 tons. And the rare earth minerals that are pulled out of the ground is largely done by child labor in Africa. So you see these well-dressed, well-coached, articulate children who show up at the COP27 in Egypt. Meanwhile, on that very continent, there are hundreds of thousands, maybe, of children slaving away to pull cobalt out of the earth. Just so that these children can feel good about themselves and get a nice big feature story and front stage and have it children-centered at COP27. All right, I guess that's a little bit of a calmer mini Jim rant, maybe not so mini. Chris, I'll leave it over to you now.
Yeah, this is absurd. I mean, first of all, I really am not, in favor of them using children to promote their agenda, but these people have no scruples. So it does not surprise me that they would abuse children to some degree by, making them puppets for their globalist agenda. But as you said, Jim, these people are also the people who are in places like the Congo, and they are using child labor to mine, lithium and these rare earth elements that are necessary in massive amounts for their, batteries and for their, dreams of a grid that runs on solar and wind, which obviously is totally impossible. But on another point, I think that we also have to just reject the emotional, tugging that they're trying to do here by, marching out these children who, put up a little picture of the world and a heart and say, "Oh my gosh, you terrible, adults don't know what you're doing and you're going to ruin, the planet for us." Actually, we're 10 times wiser than you. We know much more about this than you. You're a child. You don't know what you're talking about. And
How dare you?
I just wish that we would, take more of that kind of a stance. Like, geez, when I was 12 years old, it never in a million years would have occurred to me to go up to, a group of adults and say, let me lecture you on, like geophysics or, like some really complicated topic that, it takes years and years of instruction and education and, intelligence to accumulate to be able to have a good conversation about. But that just goes to show that, these people, these adults are using them as indoctrination tools, and they, are using them to promote their message. And I think that they think over the long term that these people are going to become, automatic voters for their, their policies. So, it worries me over the long haul, but it also just infuriates me, because I think that we do need to have a firm stance against this. This is just ridiculous. We're being told how to come up with public policies from a 12-year-old in the Dominican Republic. Like, give me a break. No.
Yeah, it would seem that there's a real educational opportunity. These children should actually learn about the people on Earth, their own age, who are slaving away for our green future. And where's their voice? Does anyone speak for them? You would think at the United Nations COP27 that the children there would speak for those children. Nobody speaks for those children. Nobody speaks for the Uyghurs in slave camps making solar panels for people. For us in the West, so we could virtue signal and put them on our homes. Nobody ever speaks for those people. All we get is this propaganda and the use of children as moral cudgels, when the real children that are suffering are the people, are the children suffering for our green future. It's just disgusting.
Well,
we speak for those people. It's just that we get suppressed.
That's right.
Right. Well, and I cued in right away on the deforestation topic, because I've written pretty extensively on this for some of our, I guess, one-pager papers that I've been writing lately. One, as an aside quickly, it's emotional blackmail. It's the same thing that they trot out with the gun rights issue and all of that. But I do want to point out one of those girls that say she was from Brazil, because that's really interesting, because an extremely large portion of the deforestation in Brazil is from ranchers moving their cattle grazing fields to other areas after they were forced to relinquish parts of it to ethanol biofuel production of sugarcane. So huge amounts of deforestation is happening due to sugarcane being harvested for biofuels. Additionally, in the Balkans, there is a huge amount of deforestation happening to satisfy the European hunger for wood pellets for energy. They literally burn wood chips over there to run power plants and stuff, which to me is just so backwards. Wow. Like, at least burn coal, burn rocks, you guys. That's at least a step up from burning wood chips. And that's green. That's green to them. Massive deforestation is green to them when it's being applied to green energy initiatives. And that's not even getting into the amount of land you need for the wind and solar capacity that they want to install. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, when the United States, Europeans settled the United States of America, North America, the deforestation was largely due to agriculture. You need a lot of land to grow enough food for the people here. Of course, technology has made it so that you can grow more and crop-resistant and drought-resistant food on less and less land. And that's one of the reasons why the deforestation, we actually have more trees in the United States right now than we did at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. It's because of the advance of technology in agriculture. Green
means one thing. It means the transfer of wealth from productive people to unproductive people worldwide.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one thing to wrap this up, and then we got another wrinkle of COP27 to get over. But yet another child quoted in this story, Melissa Obeng Karia from Ghana. She says she's had a real passion for the environment for as long as she could remember. She's 12 years old. She was taken outside during class on a little field trip to look at the plants and remembered being struck by their beauty and their variety of colors. And she said she hoped to learn from people in other countries at COP27 and called on world leaders to develop policies that would plant more trees and stop illegal mining. By the way, the mining in the Congo by children is not illegal. It's legal in that country. That's why it continues to go on. Nobody cares. She says, quote, "When floods come sometimes, they build gutters right next to your house. So when people are walking, they just throw rubbish into the gutters. So when it rains, there's no space for the water to pass into the soil, so it overflows and enters your home," she said. "They should make sure that when people are walking, instead of throwing their rubbish on the floods, they actually put them in the right bins, recycling bins." And then she said brush fires destroy the nutrients in the soil and the animal habitats. And at the end of COP27, Melissa said she wanted to leave Egypt knowing that decisions made in the negotiation rooms would be implemented. Quote, so that we can develop countries and very soon won't hear much about floods entering people's homes and destroying their jobs. Sam Karnick, that last quote is the final quote of the story, the money quote there. We can develop countries and very soon we won't hear much about floods entering people's homes and destroying their jobs. So if we all just go green, that'll change the weather. That's fantastic news. That's certainly what they've been told.
That is what they've been told. And it's very interesting, though, that she brings up the subject of people throwing trash into gutters and that gutters exists. Those are small problems that could so easily be fixed. And so many of the things that even the alarmists say would come of global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it today, so many of those things could be fixed if they were to occur. Can be fixed very easily. You don't have to shut down the entire economy, the entire global economy. You didn't have to shut it down in order to prevent people from getting a bad cold. You don't have to shut it down in order to prevent people from having water running into their homes from gutters. That's not the way things work. I'll tell you one thing, if you give a lot of money from productive people to unproductive people, that money will go into the hands of people who have political power, and they will exploit those unproductive people. So it just happens that in China, that they basically imprison Muslims and use them as slaves, and that in Africa, they're using children to do very hard and difficult and unpleasant work. And these things are all because very wealthy, powerful people say, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. Well, Jim, one last thing, they're pushing a degrowth agenda, and I mean economic degrowth agenda. But the only solution to these problems, as far as they exist, is economic growth. It's
right.
Spreading economic growth throughout the world. The United States is the engine of economic growth, and we need to actually be pushing our model in places like Africa, because places like Africa are being, pushed into the China camp, and China is making great strides in places like Africa and South America, in pushing these countries into debt to use them for their resources. So I wish that the United States would have much more of a global outlook on this and say, you know what, the ultimate solution is economic growth.
Yeah, a wealthy nation is a clean nation. It's been that's a truism. The wealthier you are, the less rubbish you have, flowing down the streets during floods. It's just the way it goes. And the policies pushed at the COP27 are going to keep more people in poverty for longer. And as we get to yet another part of this podcast, we'll learn that is actually the point. Sam, as the elder statesman on the podcast today, for once, very rare occasion. I'm not the oldest person on the podcast, and I'm also not the longest tenured person at Heartland on the podcast either. That is you by several years on me. So congratulations on that. We're going to talk a little bit about the economics of these global climate schemes. So again, in the show notes, there's a story here from Reuters. COP27. Talks on carbon market rules off to a slow start. Countries are far from agreeing on technical details for running global trading in carbon offset credits after 1 week of talks at the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. Carbon offsets allow countries or companies to pay others to cut greenhouse gas emissions to offset their own. This is great. While companies are already trading carbon offsets in private markets, the so-called Article 6 of the Paris Agreement would fix rules enabling countries to partly achieve their national climate targets by buying such credits. The hope is that international rules, backed by the entire world, could attract billions of dollars into carbon cutting projects, but countries have struggled for years to agree on what the rules should look like, what projects should be eligible, and how to ensure they are having a real world impact. Sam, I went to, I think it was COP15, was it? The one in Paris. I can't remember. I think it was 2012. And that was, Al Gore was there, and that was being pushed then. Al Gore tried to set up a carbon trading scheme. Actually, I think it was based here in Chicago, as a matter of fact, back in the, I think, mid-aughts, 2000s. and that went belly up. I think he still got paid, but that didn't go anywhere. But as this story notes, they've been trying to do this for many, many years. And I'm going to play a clip here. This clip is from a former. Let me see. I'll identify him later. But he's a retired or a former bigwig in the banking system of the United Kingdom, and he is going to explain to us in this clip what a successful carbon trading finance system looks like. Go ahead and play clip 2, Andy.
Central banks are also starting to understand nature has real value. Carbon, we already figured out. And carbon is moving very quickly into a system where it's going to be very close to a currency. Basically being able to take a ton of absorbed or sequestered carbon and being able to create a forward pricing curve with financial service architecture, documentation. I want to talk about value one more time, because the southern part of the world has value far greater than large elements of the northern part. And we start thinking about and putting prices on water, on trees, on biodiversity. We find, where does that sit? I'm doing a lot of work out of Asia, and I say that my next door neighbor, Indonesia, is the left lung of the world, and obviously Brazil's the right, and Africa, absolutely critical. And we need their natural capital as a system-based world more than we need that 66 billion we've got sitting in the basement of the Bank of England. And how do we start tokenizing? How do we start building systems that actually create not only the value, but transfer that value around the world?
Building systems, Sam Karnick. It seems to me like a scheme to transfer wealth from the wealthy Northern Hemisphere to the less wealthy, with Australia accepted, Southern Hemisphere. What's your take on that description of what he sees as an ideal future for us in our financial system?
That's exactly what it is, Jim, transfer of wealth. But it also has a nice little angle to it, which is that they can get support from big money people who have a lot of money that they've accumulated under the current system and have now pivoted toward a new system in which the wealth of productive people in the North will be given to less productive people in the South, and these brokers will skim off a big chunk of it. And that's how it always works. So in the past, it has been that you would give the money to the government to the corrupt government of what we used to call third world nations. Now, what it is you just create a system whereby the wealth flows in this oddly, seemingly natural way, but there are all these little tributaries that come off of that flow of wealth and enrich the very people who put the system in place in the first place, and who are the ones who financially support the politicians who put these policies in place in legal terms. Mm-hmm. Well, what's interesting about that, if you think about it, is it's a much better deal for them than it used to be. Used to be you go all around the world and find these individual politicians, and you'd have to pay them off, and you'd have to give a big solid gold Cadillac to some corrupt politician in a third world country. Whereas nowadays you just create a system and you siphon off some dough and everybody's happy, right? We're all happy eating bugs and freezing.
Right. Yeah, I want to move through this topic quickly, but yeah, it's a scam. Our commenters here in the on the live YouTube stream are mentioning that I can't vouch for it, but that Al Gore made $300 million on his carbon trading scheme here in Chicago. I think he's probably the only one who made money on that, him and his buddies. But the idea of carbon, they mean carbon dioxide, of course, carbon dioxide emissions, being a currency of some sort, Linnea?
For now. For now, the idea is just based on carbon dioxide, but it's other things as well. They're expanding it to methane. I wouldn't be surprised if they expanded it to other things too. Nitrogen is another one that I have a feeling they're going to start talking about a lot more. I think that it might be somewhat of a mistake to frame this as the productive versus the unproductive, because what it is essentially it's paying people to not industrialize. It's while also still, as we discussed earlier, mining their resources, just not letting them do it. We are going to take your lithium and your cobalt and we're going to pave the world with solar panels, but you cannot build a coal plant or a natural gas plant. That's what it is. And I mark my words, they're already talking about it. They have been talking about it for years. This carbon trading system stuff was never intended to stay at the national level. Never, never, never. It has always been intended to be applied to the individual. So there is a policy framework that they want to implement that would involve you going to the grocery store and wanting to buy a couple of steaks for dinner. And it says, when you swipe your card, it says, whoops, no, you can't do that because you already bought steak earlier this week, or you spent too much money on gasoline earlier this week. Your carbon credits are up. And meat is a high carbon intensive product. So you can't have that. That is 100% what they intend to do, and anyone who is trying to shy away from that fact is not seeing the bigger picture here. It's the same thing with our crusade against ESG. If ESG is applied to corporations and countries, they absolutely intend to apply it against individuals, which is why they all have such a huge interest in getting rid of anonymity online and that kind of thing. So yeah, all of this stuff is meant to be at the personal level. And at the personal level, it's a lot harder for you and me to cheat a system like this. But these politicians and the governments can cheat a carbon trading system all they want. I was laughing last week. I gave an example of a real life carbon trading scam that happened in Europe when they implemented some of this in the United Nations, or the European Union, I guess. And basically Ukraine and Russia said, cool. And they invented an infinite carbon money-making machine by like burning trash and increasing their emissions on purpose and then reducing them back to where they were before and just printing these things. And I find it hilarious because it's cheating the system, and I don't like that system. So it's funny, but you and I aren't going to be able to do something like that. It's absolutely terrible. And then the European Union didn't learn their lesson from it. They kept that stuff in place. They just wagged their finger at them and said, hey, that's not fair. That's cheating.
Yeah. I mean,
but they still have those systems.
Yeah, they do. I mean, Chris, quickly, and we can get on to some of the other topics here, but this is anti-freedom and anti-market, this entire thing. It's not left to our own devices. Free people wouldn't choose any of this stuff. It all has to be imposed upon us by our betters who have guns and the power over us.
Well, I just want to build a little bit off of what Linnea was saying, because I completely agree that the grand plan of these people is to come up with a carbon footprint app to track people's carbon footprints. And this relates to our next topic, because the Great Reset has come out in favor of this big time. And Al Gore and a bunch of the people who are at COP27 are actively building apps that can do this, because this would give them ultimate power. This would give them unprecedented power, because they could say, okay, you're using too much gasoline. You need to stop traveling so much. You need to do this. You can't, buy meat, on and on and on. It is the ultimate tool of control. And I have a very strong feeling that this won't be applied to people like John Kerry and Leonardo DiCaprio, who fly around in private jets, spewing more carbon dioxide in one day than I do in years. So I'm just so sick and tired of the do as I say, not as I do hypocrisy of these people. We just need to ignore them.
Yeah. Well, that's a nice segue into our last couple topics here, and that is our favorite real life Bond villain. Klaus Schwab was at the G20. So there's two big global conferences going on at once. This is dubbed the B20 because this is mostly focused on, instead of the top the top 20 economies in the world, which is what the G20 would be. This would be, the B20. So these are the corporate overlords who love it when they can work hand in hand with government to make sure that they have market monopoly power and always get rich. And even when they give people what they don't want, which is what the whole climate agenda is all about. But Andy, why don't you just go ahead? These are actually two clips pulled together. The first is Klaus Schwab from May of this year, and then the second part of the clip is him just last week at the big confab in Bali. Go ahead, Andy. Play clip 3, please.
Also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us. Excellencies, distinguished participants of this very important meeting. First, of course, if we look at all the challenges, we can speak about a multi-crisis, an economic, a political, a social, an ecological, an institutional crisis. But actually, what we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look different after we've gone through this transition process. Politically, the driving forces for this political transformation is the transition into a multipolar world, which has a tendency to make our world much more fragmented.
So, Chris Talgo, the Great Reset is a myth. There is no World Economic Forum. It doesn't actually exist, and they don't have any plans to reorder the way we live. That's why I think we're probably going to. I think the Great Reset label might win today on this one because of what I just said. Well, you hear that, Chris Talgo. What is your reaction to hearing again out in the open Klaus Schwab just stating practically? And let's also one quick reminder: he's not an elected official. He is not the head of any state. He is given this platform to lecture the heads of states around the world and to make sure that they're all coordinated to do apparently his bidding. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, many institutions here in America are coming out and claiming that there is no such thing as the Great Reset, such as PolitiFact, and I just read a couple articles claiming that the entire Great Reset conspiracy theory is totally moot and just move on. No, actually, all you got to do is go to their website and listen to these people's speeches because they are laying out in their own words exactly what they want to do, and they want to restructure our economy from free market capitalism to what they call shareholder or from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, which really means stakeholder collectivism. And in the process, they want to, make themselves richer than, anyone ever has been and more powerful than anyone ever has been. And they are using these giant multinational corporations to do their bidding. And they are using, governments, especially Justin Trudeau in Canada and, even the United States to some degree now, to implement these policies that the people in these countries don't want. It goes against what we want. It goes against our nature, and it goes against human nature. And I'm just really frustrated that every time you call them out for this kind of stuff, like we've written articles and articles and articles where we are quoting them verbatim. The mainstream media comes out and says, "Oh, that's just these are just right wing crazy people who are talking about a non-existent Great Reset conspiracy theory." It's there, and they are speaking in public about this stuff, and they are putting it out there for all of us to see and hear.
Yeah, we have just limited time left here on the podcast today. I've linked several stories in the show notes to this, either if you're listening on the podcast or if you're watching on YouTube, so you can read some of these terrific stories to talk about these subjects. I want to wrap up with the 7 minutes we have left. I want to make sure we get this clip in. This is a clip from that same G20 or B20, whatever you want to call it, conference in Bali, Indonesia. This is just yet another revelation of what the global elites plan for us. This is Budi Gunadi Sadikin. He's the Indonesian health minister, and he's explaining in this clip how a global health passport will work for the next pandemic. Play clip 4, please, Andy.
Have a digital health certificate acknowledged by WHO if you have been vaccinated or tested properly, then you can move around. So for the next pandemic, instead of stopping the movement of the people 100%, which clock the economy globally, you can still provide some movement of the people. So hopefully for the next pandemic, we can still see some movement of the people, some movement of the goods, and movement of the economy.
Did he
Oh,
also
thank
mention
you.
that the vaccine doesn't work? Did he mention that?
Oh, get us banned again, Chris. Thanks for that.
Well, I'm
But,
just saying.
just-
I mean, just saying. I mean,
Well, it's the hubris of the assumptions of these. I'm going to throw it to Sam first, but it's first of all, when I heard that clip the other day, I thought to myself, one of the things that struck out to me was the next pandemic.
yeah.
Ask anybody alive today to name one pandemic other than COVID in the last 150 years. Can they even name one? If they can name any, they'll say the Spanish flu of 1918. That's a true pandemic. They are already planning for the next pandemic, and they will call whatever they want the next pandemic. AIDS, for instance, was not a pandemic, but they would call something like that a pandemic and lock us down. And so it's presented as if, oh my gosh, this is great news, guys. Get yourself a global health passport that will be digital. It could be traced and tracked and shared with anybody because nothing is secure, and we'll track your movements and we'll let you move around. That way we won't have a total shutdown. All you got to do if you want to live any life, all you got to do is get a global pandemic passport, global health passport, and we'll let you move around. It's great. So we got it handled, guys. Next time this happens, it's not going to be like last time because we're all going to get registered. Sam Karnick, save me.
Well, the COVID-19 was both a threat and a promise. It was a way of saying, look, if you don't get in line, this is what it looks like, a horrific depression. And then we had a very fast recovery because usually big recessions cause quick recoveries, big recoveries. But what they're saying there is that, okay, that could happen. But if you'll get in line, if you'll take your pills, if you'll take your shot, and if you will do as we tell you, you can travel. You can be part of this wonderful global economy that we're building. It's a threat and a promise, as I say. It was showing us what they could do if they want to, that they can just move us back to before the Industrial Revolution and make us live in the 18th century again, or for those who will cooperate, for those who have good social value numbers, whatever you want to call that, those who are part of us, you can thrive, and you will thrive. So it is a threat in that regard, saying if you don't play the game, you're going to starve, literally starve. If you do play the game, utopia.
Yeah. I mean, Linnea, this kind of idea, and it's just that it's the banality of the way they say it is just so matter of fact and with a smile on their face, treating each of us as human beings, individual human beings with lives and desires and wants and plans, but as every single human being becomes only in the eyes of the government, a vector of disease, a bag of infection. It's the most anti-human thing I've ever heard, and it's said over and over again.
Right. And to their neighbors as well. So this is it's unbelievable that there's still this fetish about getting people vaccinated after it's been shown that it does not stop transmission or the severity of symptoms. That's a completely ridiculous claim to make. So it really is all about control. And you're right. It is dehumanizing. And for them, that's kind of the point. These people are communist, at least, if not something a little bit more modern, a little bit worse, probably. They truly believe that they are correct. They really think that if only they were left to pull all the levers and they were able to control everything that every little peon does, that there would be a heaven on earth type of situation, utopia, and there would be all this equality or equity rather for them. And that it would, there would never be poverty or anything again on earth. It's not going to happen. And we've seen time and time again throughout history that it leads to mass famine and death. And eventually it comes for all of them as well.
Yeah. Chris, I'll leave you to wrap it up. Let's see if you can do a better job than Linnea for getting us banned.
Oh no, I mean Linnea hit the nail right on the head, but I think this is, a modern version of, central planning and, centralized control. The Soviet Union collapsed because eventually they couldn't control the population as much as they could during the Stalinist era. But with something like a vaccine passport and, a carbon, footprint app, they could exert unprecedented control literally over our movement. So I think that this just has to be completely rejected by the people. If you value freedom and you value literally the freedom to go to the grocery store or to go on a vacation, you better reject this stuff in full because it's coming. And they laid the groundwork for this in 2020, and they've already said the next pandemic. That shows that they're already thinking ahead, and they will try to implement this. We must fight back against this.
Yeah, I mean, pandemics used to be a once in a generation, if that, occurrence, and now they apparently think there's going to be pandemics maybe every year, as many as it takes, I guess, to get us all to comply. On that happy note, thank you very much for listening to this edition of the In the Tank podcast, put on by the Heartland Institute. If you are not yet a subscriber to either our audio only or this video podcast on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Be sure to like this episode and also share it with your friends. As I said earlier, it helps us get around the evil leftist algorithm that keeps voices like ours and yours suppressed. Chris Talgo, where can the people find you?
Go to stoppingsocialism.com. We've got a really good report coming out really soon about how socialist candidates did in the 2022 midterm elections. And I hate to say it, but they did very well. So I think 84% of them won election. Yeah.
Great news. Sam Karnick, you're also the editor-in-chief of the Heartland Daily News website. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, at ST Karnick at all the major places and heartlanddailynews.com.
Excellent. And Linnea, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Linnea Lueken. I have it in my little handle there in the corner. I also write at climaterealism.com. So if you want, daily updates on, refutations of stuff that's going on in the news regarding climate and energy, that's where you will find it.
Excellent. Thank you. And you can always find me at Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org. That'll do it for today. We will talk to you next week.